Well, hi, everyone. This is what I'm going to be talking about today. It's kind of self-explanatory, but of course, there's always an alternate title. And so for those of you who've had to hear some of this story before, this one probably would suffice better. However, let's zoom in on the labyrinthine landscape of southwestern British Columbia, in a little town called Pemberton, up in the middle of the Coast Mountains here, just north of Whistler, where I live. And it's a fairly interesting place because it's next to the largest, most southerly ice cap in North America, but it's also like an important agricultural valley in BC. And of course, this is also the territory of the Lil'wat Nation, which we'll hear about in a bit. So, as I said, it's primarily an agricultural area, but it's also a natural disaster theme park. There's a volcano at the head of the valley. There's earthquakes. There's been volcanic eruptions in the last few thousand years. There's glaciers everywhere. There's avalanches. There's landslides. There's floods. Stuff gets moved around a lot. And in fact, people move that river over to the side of the valley. But it's interesting less because of the geological aspects than the biogeoclimatic aspects. Interestingly, this one little valley, we have 5 of BC's numerous biogeoclimatic zones converging here. Obviously, alpine tundra isn't too important when we're talking about snakes, but these other ones are. And you can see down here where this place is, and that means that there's a lot of plants and animals here. It's a very biodiverse area, and the Herpetofauna is biodiverse as well. It's a very interesting assemblage that's found nowhere else in British Columbia, and ergo nowhere else in Canada. So it's of interest from this standpoint. And one of the standout features of it, of course, is the presence of sharp-tailed snake. And I was very excited in August of 2011 to find a sharp-tailed snake in Pemberton on the mainland, which was of some local interest to the gentry because, you know, slow news day or whatever, but far more interesting to herpetologists because we'd never really found one on the mainland before. And the closest population in Canada is on the Gulf Islands or the southern tip of Vancouver Island. That's a long way away. The closest mainland population is in Washington, also a long way away. So right away, this is of conservation concern or interest. We don't know about the concern yet. So it's a tiny little snake. It's pretty hard to find. Hatchlings are incredibly small. Subadults, oops, where's my mousy thing? Are pretty small too. And at the same hand scale, adults aren't that big either. So it's also got some interesting characteristics, this little pointy thing on the end of its tail that no one's really sure why it exists, and also that it eats slugs. The fact that it eats slugs becomes part of the story when a developer finds out that we found a sharp-tailed snake in a place that they wanted to work on and hired a consultant who wrote a report saying, well, I went there in August and it was 43 degrees Celsius and I didn't see any slugs, so there's no way that this snake could possibly exist there, even though we had photos and geotagged everything. So that kind of started this, you know, malign ball rolling. So, you know, we did what all good herpetologists would do, which is go and try and find some more of them. And this proved to be a very, very taxing enterprise. First, because it does get very hot very early in Pemberton, and the snakes tend to disappear underground. They're fossorial and they're also nocturnal. But after about 600 hours of searching, we managed to find a few more populations. And this was over a couple years. And this represents like maybe 10 snakes in 5 places. But we realized that they were distributed at least in this sort of 5-kilometer area on this one south-facing hillside at the corner of the valley. But the thing that we mostly found out when we were searching was that this hillside was under enormous recreational pressure, that everything that you could imagine going on was going on in this area. So it's like an international mountain bike destination. It's an international paraglide competition area. There's motocross, there's horseback riding, people walk their dogs there, there's illegal camping. BC Hydro comes in every 5 years and totally levels the critical habitat of the sharp-tailed snakes, turns it into wood chips. And of course, this was prior to legalization of marijuana, so there was like no end of grow-ops all over this hillside either. So this is not good, but also, you know, this is in Lillooet territory, and they're not really getting much chance to have a say in the land management here and use this for the things they would like to use these areas for. So, you know, this is the kind of situation that we would get where you have a mountain bike trail and you have some very critical life history places next to the mountain bike trail. And this doesn't really matter so much for nocturnal fossorial snakes like sharp-tails, but boas get run over and things like that. And, you know, the problem is there might be 1,000 cars going into Pemberton on a spring weekend to mountain bike because Whistler, which would normally draw some of them, is still closed because there's snow in the valley. So the pressure is huge here. Okay. So in 2012, we managed to get this Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation grant, and we were going to do a bunch of things with it that would be helpful for the village community, and we thought the developer, because we knew this was coming to this hillside and that this was going to happen. So, you know, some of these sites that we have are going to be wiped out. And we thought, oh, well, you know, maybe this will be, the province will be able to help us. And of course, turns out that the way things work in the province with their wildlife legislation and such, this isn't really the case. You pretty much have to catch someone cutting a snake in half with an axe or sending an email to someone saying, let's kill the snakes, before you could do anything about it. The feds, of course, well, we know that's not happening. And as much as they want to help, this wasn't federal land, so this is the situation. They came to town actually to talk to the council and sort of softball a stewardship approach and say, hey, we're here to help if you guys want to do anything about these snakes. But the village pretty much said, take a hike. Okay, and so we have these recovery strategy things that were proposed in 2017, adopted in 2020, which is great because at this point we now have this Pemberton population as a separate designated unit under COSEWIC, so we could like focus on it a bit more and has a bit of different threats than other ones. And we thought, oh, they just launched a community plan in Pemberton and they have a development permit review process, so that'll help. Well, of course it didn't, because again, we're having these situations of hard environmental assessments that are just kind of giving them free rein to do what they want. So 2012, this is kind of where we were at. And by 2020, Pemberton's population had gone from 2,300 to 3,400, 40% increase. So that's big, but an 89% increase in available housing in that census, which means we haven't accounted for all the people who are going to move in yet, which is going to be thousands. So this pressure in this area is going to be insane. And we've already lost 3 of the sites. And the 2 that are hanging on are, you know, in an area that may be developed as well. And this is an example of like one site that we lost, a very important site. It was a rubber boa denning site and a sharp-tailed snake denning site, but also egg-laying site. And the developer basically floated a plan to dynamite above the road and got everyone to sign off on it, and then dynamited below the road where the site actually was. And then he was like, oh, somebody must have put the wrong dot on the map. So that was gone. And all this housing, of course, sells out in 10 seconds, and there's like no end to the number of phases that are going on. And there we are. So this is the mess that we're in. There's like this very important and interesting population, a very tiny population, relic population of sharp-tailed snakes, and it's got 0 protection. So my co-investigator here, she has worked for an organization called Stewardship Pemberton for many years. They have a little nature center. They mostly work on like salmon restoration and things like this, but she jumped into the fray and started to help out, come up with ideas. And one of the first things we got going was like artificial cover objects being monitored by community members. This was great because they were sending us photos of sharp-tailed snakes under these objects. So we were actually getting lots of data about when they were there and where they were. Okay, so we put up a bunch of signs. Again, not a big deal for sharp-tailed snakes, but it raised people's awareness about the other snakes in the valley. Gave some talks to council and the public, and got wildlife photographers interested in little critters instead of bears. We finally got a collaborative piece of land protected between Ducks Unlimited, the District of Squamish, and Pemberton. And it just happened, they wanted the wetland protected, but it just happened to be a sharp-tailed snake site as well. So there's one piece of land that's actually protected. And then last year, we got some money to train some Lillooet biological technicians who had mostly been working on salmon as well, but they were pretty keen to work on snakes. And we put out some ACOs in areas that we'd never been able to work before. And lo and behold, we got a sharp-tailed snake. So now we've expanded the range by about 10 kilometers, which is great because that housing development is all over here. So now this is protected, and this is on First Nations land. And this doesn't really work. Anyway, and we got some other things going, eDNA collaborations. We're swabbing tiles out there, and we actually got a hit from one, which is fantastic. And then we got a seat at the table with the recreational trails people. And this was probably the most interesting project, which was a collaboration with the British Columbia Institute of Technology students to protect an area of critical habitat by closing some mountain bike trails that just looped through it and didn't really need to loop through it. So we threw some sticks on it. People moved the sticks off. We put the sticks back. Eventually, we did some guerrilla stuff like writing on rocks and trees, and now it seems to be holding. Veronica made some snake art out of bike parts with some QR codes that take you to things like this. And then it seemed to be working. People in the community were like making sightings and sending stuff to us and posting on Facebook and being aware and protecting some areas. And obviously, we're not building a big giant den for sharp-tailed snakes, but this is the kind of thing that people seem to want to do. And so if we can get them doing it, that's great. And that's the end of the story.
Okay, looking at that sharp tail and the smooth scales, that it could be useful for backing back down a burrow.
Yes, that is one of the things that has been proposed. Others include like anchoring it while it pulls slugs off the ground and things like that. But that makes sense because it's fossorial. So, agreed.
Great. And thank you so much for everyone who's here today. So my name is Katharine Yagi. I'm a research associate for 8 Trees Incorporated. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've had the opportunity to work on the last few months. And that's using long-term data to simulate extinction risk for 2 Massasauga populations in Ontario, Killbear Provincial Park and the Wainfleet Bog. So you may or may not know this already, but the Massasauga is obviously a species at risk, especially in Ontario. It's the only location in Canada you find it. It has 2 designatable units. The Great Lakes St. Lawrence DU is classified as threatened, which is located over here around Georgian Bay, of course. And the Carolinian DU is classified as endangered. And you can see the dotted lines in this figure showing you the historical range, and then the hashed sort of grayed in area, or more of a contemporary range for this species. And so you can see where it kind of exists around Georgian Bay and Bruce Peninsula today. And in the Carolinian, we have really tiny, a significant reduced in range. We have the Ojibwe Prairie way over here in the Windsor area. And we'll wait to hear from Jonathan to see how they're doing, and we're not sure if they found any recently. And the Wainfleet's way over here. So very isolated from each other. So of course, and I'm fortunate to sit on this amphibian and reptile specialist subcommittee for COSEWIC, so I had some opportunity to think about this and discuss how COSEWIC looks at species at risk, and what they really care about or really need to know are population estimates and changes over time and trends, and threats and levels of threats. And this helps assess the status of the species. So fortunately, there's been lots of research on Massasauga over the years, and we know a decent amount, I would say, about Massasauga. General behavior and life cycle. We've come to understand their survival rates to some extent. Their generation time and fecundity a little bit more, especially in Wainfleet. Habitat requirements. So a lot of our radiotelemetry work was shed some light on this: foraging habitat, gestation habitat, and hibernation habitat, as well as the threats. And I guess no surprise to understand the threats of Massasauga fall in these categories more or less: habitat loss, habitat degradation, road mortality, and poaching or persecution. And I guess the question I wanted to present to you today was, what do we kind of want to know now, especially in terms of assessment or in terms of the figuring out what the future is for this species? So what are the trends? What are the population trends for each of the DUs? Which threats are each DU most vulnerable to? And how can we address these threats to help prevent further population declines? And I may or may not get to that third point today, because these are big questions, but I hope I can address or talk a little bit about the first two questions. So again, this figure, which I do like looking at, it's a good summary. We are fortunate to have a long-term marker capture data set from Killbear for Provincial Park that spans the years 2005 to 2020. And we also have the Wainfleet bog marker capture data set, which is very long-term, from about 2000 to present day. And I put 2020 because that's pretty much where the data goes up to for this presentation. So in summary, for Wainfleet bog, we were able to come up with a proxy for a population estimate over time. So we were able to show, using a new kind of special method to estimate population abundance. And you can see the trends over here. So it's called N-indiv, or number of individuals. And we calculated it using a combination of marker capture data, so knowing the new individuals caught in the population each year, the recaptured individuals, and because it's so long-term, we can age the individuals and understand if we know how old individuals are, we can backcast their presence in the population for those many years. So we're able to come up with an interesting and pretty accurate curve or trend for Wainfleet. And you can see, the publication, 2020, we published the data that kind of went up to here. It kind of plateaus to 2014. So it did look like quite a significant decline, and that was a true decline due to changes in the habitat, drainage, and the ecological trap effect, which I won't get into today. And since then, it looks like, sorry, I'm tired from walking, and we had to run here from lunch. So it looks like an increase in numbers, which looks amazing and looks great. But a lot of this increase in numbers we're seeing is largely as a result of our direct mitigation work with the neonates and Wainfleet. So we're seeing a positive trend, quite a large increase in individuals in Wainfleet. Comparatively, we were able to do the same calculation for Killbear Provincial Park. And I found this really interesting. So courtesy of Kenton Otterbein at MNRF and Michael Colley, who I'm not sure if he's here, but his master's work would have been incorporated into that data set. So you can see, well, it's not gone up. It's gone up a little bit when Michael was there. And it kind of looks like it's kind of going down a little bit, but you can kind of see a trend here. And I think this is, I don't know if it's the first time everyone's able to look at this over a long period of time, but we can do this, we can show this with a good comparison right now. And now, because we had these long-term data set, we were able to calculate age-based survival rates in both populations. Oh, and the threats, of course, are a bit different in Killbear. I wrote road mortality. I'm assuming that's the biggest one up in that area. Of course, we have, yes, I have Jimmy there nodding his head. Road mortality, of course, habitat loss degradation. This is something more systematic, more broad that affects everything, but road mortality was a big one I wanted to address. So I did come up with a matrix analysis. I did construct age, a Leslie matrix, basically. And using calculated values from the raw data, came up with, age at first reproduction, fecundity, and age-based survival. I was able to come up with population growth rate estimates, and then we're going to look at a sensitivity test showing which parts of the model were most sensitive in this case. And I did try to model then some threats, which is the next slide here, to show what perhaps road mortality might look like and what perhaps habitat degradation might look like and what habitat loss might look like in both populations, and constructed a probability of extinction curve for both. Now I can explain the details after, but I really want to get to the figures because I don't have a lot of time. So generally I got so for Killbear, lambda here is the population growth rate, and anything above 1 is positive growth. So I did get a positive lambda for Killbear. Now I broke Wainfleet down into different sections because Wainfleet has a lot of history that I know about. So Wainfleet, before mitigation, had this extreme negative, like below 1. Look at that value. So it was crashing before mitigation here. After mitigation, we have this extreme positive value, 1.2 of lambda. So I have this very positive curve. And then when I can put all the data together to see if on average, did it make a difference? Well, it's still below 1, not as far below 1, but it's still negative. So for the threats analysis, sorry, did someone talk? Oh, so for the threats analysis, I used both positive values or else I wouldn't be able to compare them. So we did. I looked at Killbear and Wainfleet from the most recent years for the rest of the analysis. And from the sensitivity analysis, we found out that the highest reproductive value for Killbear was age 5, which ended up being about their first year of reproduction. And similarly for Wainfleet, the highest reproductive value was age 3, which is also the first year of reproduction. And the most sensitive age groups were all of the pre-reproductive ages for both populations. So for Killbear, it's age 0 to 4, and for Wainfleet, it was, age 0 to 2. It's a little bit different, but the theme is the same. So for threat 1, road mortality, I modeled loss of individuals per year in the population. And, I just sort of increased numbers lost per year to get these probability of extinction curves. Now, obviously, red here in Killbear is Killbear Provincial Park, blue is Wainfleet. Killbear obviously has this huge, they're very sensitive to losing individuals. And I called this road, 2 minutes left, great. I called this road mortality. You can equate it to anything you want, but losing individuals per year had a huge effect on Killbear compared to Wainfleet. And when you looked at threat 2, habitat degradation, I reduced the survival of those reproductive age groups, the pre-reproductive age groups, by different percentages over all these percentages to get the curve. So Killbear was also very sensitive to reducing survival of juveniles and neonates more than Wainfleet in comparison. For threat 3 was habitat loss. I just broadly stated it, but I did model loss of the adults, reduce their survival systematically to get the curve. And I did see a bit of a switch. I saw Wainfleet more sensitive here. Now, the percent decline is super high, but that's because this group is not the most sensitive value in the model. So these percentages are much higher. So I did see Wainfleet being a bit more sensitive compared to Killbear in terms of this parameter. So I targeted age 5 for Killbear and age 3 for Wainfleet because that was their first year of reproduction. Okay, conclusions and recommendations. I think I'm okay. So overall, and this was a quick analysis, I would say. I didn't have a lot of time to vet it and discuss with other people who have ideas about this, but it does look like those pre-reproductive age groups are super important in terms of increasing their survival or preventing their survival from declining. And systematically removing individuals, so road mortality is a huge problem for especially Killbear, it seems. Now, we don't have the same road situation in Wainfleet, but we have other situations that are equivalent. So, but it does seem to affect Killbear a bit more. And, you know, take this with a grain of salt. The whole Wainfleet argument is based on that.
I was just wondering about the age of reproduction and whether there's enough data to separate out into male and female and look into differences.
There probably is a lot of data to be able to do that. I don't know the numbers, but Anne's right there. If you have questions, she'll be able to tell you since she looks at that often for other things. But yes, we have a lot of data to be able to say that, to determine.
Okay, thank you all for coming. My name is Rachelle Fortier. I'm research lead with the Adopt a Pond program at the Toronto Zoo, and I'm going to be talking to you about a little bit about the work we're doing with a population viability analysis for our local Blanding's turtle population. I would like to start by acknowledging that the land that we are on is the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin peoples, who are and have been the stewards of these lands since time immemorial. As a non-Indigenous person who actually grew up right here in the Ottawa River Valley, I'm extremely thankful for the Algonquin peoples for caring for these lands that I've been privileged to live on. I also want to acknowledge that the lands where the research that I am presenting today was conducted is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Massasaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And I strive to deepen my understanding of local Indigenous communities where I live and work and support them in any way that I can, and I encourage everyone here to do the same. So I'd like to introduce you to our study population and species, which is the Rouge River watershed Blanding's turtles in South Central Ontario, just outside of Toronto. Which is also an area that is largely encompassed by the Rouge National Urban Park. As many of you know, the Blanding's turtle is a provincially threatened species here in Ontario and a federally endangered. And this specific population has been experiencing dramatic declines over the past few decades due to those typical threats that we see for these turtles. So things like habitat loss, road mortality, etc. So as of 2012, after extensive survey and monitoring the area, there was as few as 7 known adults living within the area, and this population was deemed functionally extinct. In response to this, the Adopt a Pond program and the Toronto Zoo launched a long-term Blanding's turtle reintroduction project through headstarting in 2012, and the first head starts were released in 2014. So again, many of you probably understand the process of headstarting, but for those who don't, turtle headstarting offers a method of subsidizing small populations and most often involves the collection and incubation of eggs and the subsequent captive care of those hatchlings until they are raised until they're a size where they can persist better in the population, have less threats to them, especially around things like predation. So we raise our hatchlings until we like to say they're about the size of a small baked potato before they then get released out into the wild, where they can then contribute to the population and hopefully eventually become breeding adults. But it's not enough just to go and dump a bunch of turtles in a wetland and hope for the best if we really want to understand if what we're doing is effective. And so we also have a regular monitoring program of these individuals where we monitor movement, growth rates, and also mortality and survivorship. And so our goal of this project is to release a minimum of 50 2-year-old Blanding's turtles every year for a total of 20 years to reach a target population of 100 to 150 breeding adults by 2040, which was deemed to be a population size where they could be self-sustaining. So our planned end date as of now is 2034. And in order to really understand the current and future impacts of this project on this population, we are currently working on a population viability analysis, which is defined here. So we are using this PVA to not only provide insights into the success of our efforts so far, but also to gain insights into worthwhile management adjustments potentially in the future. So these analyses were done in Vortex 10.6, which is an extremely user-friendly program specifically built for population viability analyses, or PVAs. And we use demographic data from 2014 to 2022 to evaluate the population trajectory over the next 200 years to compare the potential influence of various management strategies on variables like population growth rate, size, and probability of extinction. And I also want to mention here that since we have an extremely young population, we've only been releasing head starts since 2014, there's a lot of unknown within this population. And so many of the model parameters, which I haven't listed all here today, are very much based on knowns about turtle biology. And the more detailed parameters like age-specific mortality for age classes that we might be missing, were supplemented with data from similar populations, and specifically using data from the Nova Scotia population shared to us by the Mercer-Tubedic Research Institute and Parks Canada. So our objectives for this PVA were to, one, determine the impact that our head starting efforts have had to date, and to gain insights into the progress towards our project goals under the current management plan. To determine what influence changes in management could have on things like growth rate, population size, and extinction risk. And also to determine what effect uncertainty within this model parameters, since there's so much we don't know about the population, could have on the projected population persistence. So to start with our first objective, we ran two models. So we ran a base model where no further supplementation occurred after 2022, and what we like to call the Rouge River Watershed Model, or our current management plan, which represents that current plan, which is releasing a minimum of 52-year-old turtles incubated at a 1 to 1.5 male to female sex ratio for the next 12 years. So looking at these two scenarios together, we can see that the population, both scenarios experience a dramatic decline once our supplementation or head starting concludes, likely a result of high juvenile mortality and low natural recruitment. After we see this dip, we can see that there's an increase in population size, presumably once the more head-started turtles become of reproductive age and start reproducing. But as a whole, we do see a slight decline in both scenarios, very slight, over the next 200 years. And when looking at these values like stochastic growth rate, which is our stochastic R, probability of extinction, which is PE, and our population sizes, which are split into a whole population and then adult population, we can see that if we were to stop management right now, we do not reach our goal of 100 breeding adults. Additionally, when comparing the two scenarios, we can see that if we do continue with our current management plan, we reduce probability of extinction by 10.6%, and we increase the number of individuals to 232 approximately, and about 96 breeding adults. So, and we still, unfortunately, see a negative stochastic growth rate even when supplementation is continued. So we also wanted to further understand what that is causing that big dip. And so we separated our population into an adult population and a juvenile population to look at it in this visual way. So the juvenile population is that lighter blue, teal, and adult is that darker blue. So once separated, we can see that the adult population does continue to increase over the next 25 years until about 2047, where it somewhat stabilizes between 100 and 150 individuals. And in contrast, once our head starting efforts are concluded, the juvenile population does drop dramatically, which is likely driving that drop in total population size from 300 individuals to about 100 individuals. So we're assuming that because there's still are likely very low natural recruitment over the next 20 years, we're losing more head started individuals than we're gaining juvenile individuals and hatchlings through natural recruitment. So once the majority of these head starts start to mature and start reproducing naturally, then we start to see that slight incline back into a more stable population. So therefore, these results show that we really do need continued management in order to reach our goals and to have a more sustainable population. So just because we're doing a certain management doesn't mean that that is the best plan that we could be working with. So we also wanted to compare how potential changes in this management could have on the population. So we wanted to look at if we independently change the number of head started turtles or the length of the program, what could that possibly have on the population? So we did this through sensitivity tests within Vortex, and our results demonstrate that by either increasing the number of head started turtles or the length of the program, we can see by these graphs that will increase the population size, but additionally, we will also increase the stochastic growth rate and decrease the probability of extinction. And I don't have all those values here because it's a massive big chart. And we also decided to look at varying the length of the captive head start, so either a 1 year or a 2 year, and also saw very similar results. And because we have a very specific goal of reaching 100 to 150 individuals, we wanted to look at how those potential changes in management would have impact reaching those targets. So using our current management plan, which is this light green, a solid line here, we can see that at the end of our 12 years, next 12 years of supplementation, the total population of breeding adults is predicted to be around 91 individuals. And the first year that it hits that 100 individual mark is 2041, which is extremely close to our original target date. Results again show that as we increase the number of supplemented individuals, that time it takes us to reach that goal is decreased. Which is the same for 1 and 2 year old head starts. We also wanted to look at if we just change the length of the program independently, what impact would that have? And we can see that increasing it for all the 2 year old turtle scenarios, we reached that goal of 100 turtles within about 17 to 19 years, while scenarios where the turtles are only head started for 1 year, we don't reach that goal until 25 years. So this is all valuable information for us to look at potential future changes to improve our population trajectory within management of this population. And now those are things that we can very easily manipulate, but we also wanted to look at how variables that we're much more uncertain about, because there's a lot that we don't know within the population, how changes in those variables might impact the population growth. And one that we're very curious about specifically because we're in such an urban population is frequencies of catastrophes or catastrophes in general. So we wanted to look at, do a sensitivity test to look at how the change in the frequency or the severity of a catastrophe could impact this population without changing anything else, so continuing our current management. And we can see that there is a lot of variation there. And we're also looking at doing a model looking at variations in mortality as well. And so running scenarios where there may be zero natural recruitment in the future in the population to see what impact that might have. And very important in using this when we're making those future decisions. So for final thoughts, it was really exciting to go through this PVA and show that our head starting efforts have had a positive impact on the population so far. However, in order to meet those goals, we really do need to continue management and possibly consider changes to that if we want to change that goal in the future. There is still a lot that we don't know about this population, so there's a lot of uncertainty around these parameters, specifically ones like age of first reproduction for this population, percent of breeding females, nest success, and hatchling survival. So it's recommended that once our head-started turtles, more of our head-started turtles reach that reproductive age, to further investigate these variables and then reconduct a PVA to help build on this one and inform any more, further inform future management needs. Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone here and to all of our partners, and I'll take any questions.
Hi there. Just wondering, A, where do you get your Blanding's turtles eggs from, and how do you manage genetic diversity?
Yes, so they come from a more stable source population in more northern Ontario, so outside of southern Ontario, where we have permits to collect those. And we do collect in a variety of kind of locations within that area from year to year to hopefully maintain that genetic diversity.
Why, and I don't know if you can answer this, Rachel, but why was the decision to head start rather than to release like more of a mass amount of hatchlings?
Yes.
Why is the decision there?
So there was an original PVA done in 2013, again, using data from similar populations to kind of make these original management goals. And because we are such an urban population, and I mean, I wasn't there when the decision was made, but I'm assuming because it is such an urban population where we know predation is quite high, that we felt that, or that it was felt that giving them that extra head start in life and having them at that larger size where they're past that critical point of predation would give that population the best bet. And something which is very difficult to actually do in the PVA is that we do from year to year, depending on how many eggs we collect, because we often collect more than 50 in order to give ourselves a good bet that they'll all hatch, is that we do also release a subset of hatchlings from year to year as well. But unfortunately, there's not a good way to put that information into the PVA. So that's also something to consider when we're looking at our future management goals, that we are supplementing more than that. And again, and 50 is a minimum. So if we are able to collect a few more and release 60 per year, then we'll do that as well.
Hi, so my name is Kara Scott, and I'm currently an MSc student here at Carleton. However, I had the privilege of conducting research into turtle clinging and climbing abilities for my undergraduate thesis, supervised by Steve Cook and co-supervised by Greg Bolte. Also, my co-authors and I just recently published our paper in Ecological Engineering Journal, the Freshwater Turtle Climbing Abilities, Implications for the Design and Use of Shoreline Erosion Control Structures. And there's a little QR code there if you're interested. I'd just like to take a moment to thank and acknowledge the funding and support that we received through Carleton, to Queen's University Biological Station, to Kawartha Conservation, to the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, to NSERC. So our outline is, we'll start with the problem with shoreline erosion barriers, followed by turtle clinging and climbing abilities, and then finally future implications for shoreline modifications and restoration. So the problem with shoreline erosion barriers. So as you all know, littoral environments are very important to a wide range of animals, from shorebirds to mammals to reptiles to amphibians, which use it for food, foraging during stopover and migration, to general habitat, etc. Turtles are no exception, and they also are particularly vulnerable to shoreline changes, and they use shoreline access for many of their life history traits, such as for dispersal, as demonstrated here by this trekking snapping turtle, which I ensured got across the road safely. And moving from one water body to another, they need to access the land. And so shore access is really very important. To reproductive behaviors, such as nesting, as demonstrated by this painted turtle digging her nest at cubes. To just basking. And basking is important for many reasons. As you all know, thermal regulations, they're ectotherms, so they require outside energy and heat to maintain their body temperatures. To dermal health, to hormonal regulation. Also, turtles have sight fidelity. So taking out access to a certain to a certain site that they are loyal to could have greater impacts down the road that if it's something that they use every year. Also, because Chelonians at large are over half of species globally are at risk of extinction. And so it's just important to understand how we can better protect these species. So the blame for shoreline modification falls at the feet of us, unfortunately. Humans like to live near water, and over half of the global population lives within 3 kilometers of fresh water. And we like to use that water for our urban cityscapes, so it often results in shoreline hardening, as demonstrated here by the Montreal downtown. You can see concrete shoreline hardening there. To water transportation infrastructure, as demonstrated by the Rideau Canal. To rural recreation and residential use, as demonstrated by this cottage. So you can see that the implications for shoreline modification are great. And so we decided to focus in on freshwater turtle climbing abilities and how it relates to shorelines and access. So the first thing we did was we had to create a structure and a system to test turtles to cling. And so we created a ramp and pulley system using both smooth and rough ramps. And then we had to go catch the turtles, which meant a lot of time snorkeling around with a dip net, chasing after map turtles, as well as pounding in stakes for pike nets to catch painted and musk turtles. So then we tested the maximum clinging angles for painted turtles, northern map turtles, and eastern musk turtles, using both the smooth and the rough ramps. And to do this, we ensured that when each individual turtle was placed on the ramp, we made sure that all 4 limbs were touching the ramp before we started to slowly raise the ramp. And the angle at which they were no longer able to cling to, we recorded as their max angle, and we did that 3 times for each turtle on each ramp. So we found for the maximum clinging angle for painted turtles, for smooth ramps was 37-degree angles, and for rough ramps was 73-degree angles. For the eastern musk turtle, we found that the maximum clinging angle for the smooth ramp was 45-degree angles, and for the rough ramp was 87-degree angles. For the northern map turtle, for the smooth ramp, their maximum clinging angles were 41 degrees, and similarly to the musk, the rough maximum clinging angle was 87 degrees. Just a little fun anecdote, there were a large number of map turtle and musk turtles that were actually able to cling to 90-degree angles, as demonstrated by this little map turtle. With one of our researchers was always sure to have their hands below the turtles to make sure they didn't fall and hurt themselves. So we also ran some statistical analyses, and we found that surface type had strong statistical significance for effects upon maximum clinging angles for all 3 species. Mass was found to be statistically significant for its effects upon maximum clinging angles just for painted and musk turtles. And sex, there was no statistical significance, which is interesting because there was morphological differences between the sexes. So because the painted turtle was the weakest clinger, and also it's the most ubiquitous in nature, we decided to use this species as our test species for volitional climbing. And we essentially used the clinging test as a jumping off point to test the climbing. So we set up 1,000-liter tanks on the dock of cubes. We built structures where we could permanently or semi-permanently alter the angle at which the ramps were sitting. And with to have cameras recording everything. Each turtle was put in the smooth and a rough ramp tank and held for 5-hour trials at increasing 5-degree increments. And we counted it as a successful climb if we observed all 4 feet climb above the waterline. So the goal was to find the maximum angle that they could climb with the highest percentage of individual turtles that could do so. So for the smooth trials, for the smooth ramps, they peaked at 72% at 30 and 35 degrees. And for the rough ramps, that peaked at 88% of them able to bask or to climb at 35 degrees and 40 degrees. While we did not run any statistical analyses on these, we did observe that there was some differences in sex and their abilities to climb. So future implications for shoreline modifications and restoration. So first of all, these 3 species are all listed under the Federal Species at Risk Act as special concern. So it's just important to properly take care of and manage our species and make sure that their populations can increase in numbers. Also, we are not advocating for pouring concrete everywhere and creating hardened shorelines with concrete angles. Obviously, the best option is always the natural option, and the best shoreline is either to not touch it or to naturalize it to as close as possible to its original state. However, because of erosion, we sometimes do need to harden our shorelines. And so when that is needed, it's important to take into account local species and their needs. And I should note that obviously we did not test all of the turtle species in our area, but the painted turtle was the weakest. And so in this area, for example, it'd be important to take in their climbing abilities when building future shorelines modifications. Guys, thank you.
Fantastic talk.
Thanks.
That was super cool. And I've tried chasing lizards up concrete ramps and it with mixed results, so much so it never got published. So my question I wanted to ask is, how did you motivate the turtles to actually hang on during your clinging? Did you just hold them halfway up the wall and schmuck them on? Or did someone like scooch behind them and try to motivate them to actually
For the clinging or the climbing?
Let's start with the clinging.
So we just ensured that all 4 feet were on the ramps so that they were kind of already engaged, and we would just slowly raise the ramp, and like they usually cling on, right? So that's we wouldn't really motivate them, but they just want to like not fall off, right? So
They clearly behaved better than any of mine. That's super cool. Thank you.
the one problem we did have, though, I should mention, is sometimes they would be shy and they'd tuck into their shells, and so we'd have to wait for them to put their feet back out and try again.
Why did you choose the turtle species that you chose? Like, and I'm just wondering pretty much why didn't you include the snapping turtle? Possibly.
Well, mostly ease of access. It was easy to catch these 3. They were easily accessible. I was out of Queen's University Biological Station. These 3 turtles were easily accessible there and easy to work with. Yeah, also painted turtles are, as I said before, like they're super common in North America. So they can, studying them can be used in multiple places.
So in instances that you can't have like a naturalized shoreline, so if you're doing like wetland restoration, is there certain textures of materials that you'd recommend?
Well, so obviously textured is better. I didn't really test different kinds of texture. It was just essentially a concrete ramp with like dowels that created these grooves every 1/4 inch, essentially. We do have colleagues who are currently studying different erosion barrier texturing. For example, one of them is looking at almost like a mangrove root kind of system, but it's all concrete. But that kind of texturing and seeing if that is beneficial to biodiversity.
Okay, I'll come find you later.
Did you consider the difference between like wet and dry textures? So like whether or not like being wet might be more slippery. I noticed that like when you were doing the clinging test, it was all dry. So
yeah,
did you consider wetting it?
We didn't specifically test for that. Although like in the climbing tests, the ramps would just naturally get wet. But again, we weren't specifically testing for that. But it didn't seem to overly affect things, especially on the grooved textured ramp.
This is sort of a discussion of something that should be very obvious. And really the abstract covers it all, but I'm just going to talk about how we found out about this, or how it triggered me to think about the problems of drawing down water in the winter and the effects this has on the populations of various frogs and other species. And this is my thesis species, Lithobates pipiens, which moves in its life cycle. It hibernates in one kind of water and moves across the land to another kind of water to breed, and then spends the summer terrestrially. And so it moves all across the landscape. And because of this, when it makes the big movement towards the hibernation sites, we call it burn Henry Ford in effigy night, because it makes you hate motor vehicles just about more than anything else, except maybe Jefferson salamanders in the spring. And so it just happens that when I wrote this article for the local newspaper, that same night, we had a major mortality event of frogs moving upstream into the impounded water behind the dam in Oxford Mills. And for those of you who know about Mud Puppy Night, this is where we do Mud Puppy Night. And so we were going out every week after that to the site. And these are the other frogs that, besides the leopard frogs, that were found on the bridge at Oxford Mills. So it was mostly leopard frog movement, but there were also bullfrogs and green frogs, and this one wood frog that wasn't anywhere near where I've heard wood frogs calling in the past. So this is the dam at Oxford Mills. This is where we do Mud Puppy Night. Many of you have been to Mud Puppy Nights. Mud Puppy Nights, we go out every Friday night at 8 o'clock in the evening to see what the mud puppies are doing. We start the first Friday after Thanksgiving so that we'll be there to see the mud puppies arrive, and also so we see all these other species that that we encounter in the process of looking for mud puppies. And so this is a dam across the creek that upstream of here is anoxic in the winter. The anoxia is probably promoted by the dam being there because it's dammed up, and the water that comes over the dam is often anoxic in the winter, and the mud puppies go downstream, the frogs die. So this dam was rebuilt by the province in the 1950s, and the Ministry of Natural Resources manages it by putting in logs to retain spring floodwater and taking out logs so that they'll have logs to put in for the winter to prevent flooding in the spring. And for the first time, we saw frogs that had been swept over the spillway and had been wounded or died when they hit the concrete of the spillway. And so this was our first hint that something was happening. And these are the other species that we saw below the spillway. And it's really spooky to find dead frogs in a place where you've only ever seen live frogs before. And then what happened is frogs started to bail out of the impoundment and head downstream towards the areas that they'd left to move upstream to hibernate behind the dam. And this first night we saw a few moving across the parking lot beside the dam. And then a night when I wasn't there, Amanda and Matt were doing Mud Puppy Night, and they saw substantial mortality on the bridge of frogs that had bailed. And so this is something that I've seen with remote aquatic hibernacula, frogs that are hibernating in little pools and holes along the roads and ditches, that sometimes in December they'll decide that this wasn't a good enough place and will try to move to some other place. And pretty clearly, these frogs had been spooked by the reduction in water level and were getting out of the impoundment. So this sort of got me thinking about the danger of these impoundments. And of course, Matt Keevil has his snapping turtles that hibernate so close to the edge of the lake that mice chew on their shells in the winter because they're trying to stay away from the otters, which we've just seen eating map turtles this morning. And here's I mean, this was just 70 centimeters in Oxford Mills, but this is Hoople Bay, which is an impoundment created by the St. Lawrence spillway. And normally the water level in the bay is at the level of my hat in that photograph. But the International Joint Commission historically has not managed water levels in the St. Lawrence with any regard for biodiversity. And so they just draw it down if that's going to improve the level of the Great Lakes. And we spent the whole afternoon here, didn't see a single frog. We saw, I think, 3 predated snapping turtle nests on the causeway that's at the downstream end of this lake. And obviously, it's not a good place for turtles or for frogs. And yeah. So this is something that impacts all aquatic species, and we've really got to think about this. And it's one of these things that Alita and I suspect that because we don't have jobs, that we see in the autumn when everybody's gone back to class or they've gone back to the office from doing their summer field work. And thanks to Matt Keevil and Amanda Bennett for helping with Mud Puppy Nights. And just as a mud puppy reflection, the first time I heard about mortality from mud puppies was Francis Cook and Sherm Blakeney in the 50s, collecting mud puppies in the drawn down locks of the Rideau Canal.
Hi, I'm Hannah McCurdy-Adams. I use the pronouns she and her, and I co-chair the Canadian Eastern Massasauga Rattlesnake Recovery Implementation Group, or CEMRIG, and I co-chair it along with Aidan Maloney, who is also at this conference. And so I want to introduce the group, but also just a bit about Massasaugas, although we've already had the Yagis give us a good introduction to other snake things, especially cat. But yeah, generally across the range, depending on where you look and what government and what legislation, Eastern Massasaugas are generally at risk. And the Southern Ontario populations are in need of the most urgent conservation management. And then to Anishinaabe people, the Massasauga rattlesnake holds very special meaning and purpose as a medicinal, spiritual, and cosmic entity. And so as told by Sam Kawakwado, an elder and knowledge keeper of Shawanaga First Nation, and shared to me by Roger Jacklin, an elder and knowledge keeper of Magnetawan First Nation, the story of the Massasauga describes it as a plant protector and a type of conservation measure. When it buzzes its tail, it's telling us that we have harvested enough blueberries or other medicinal plants, and that we should leave the rest for the other more than human relations or animals. And so I was asked to start this CEMRIG group, and I'd like to introduce it to everyone. We are focused on collaboratively implementing conservation efforts for the Eastern Massasauga rattlesnake, particularly in Ontario, but we do have some US members and work with US institutions. So we've got over 70 members currently that work for municipal, provincial, and federal governments, Indigenous nations, universities, consulting companies, zoos, and other conservation organizations. And there's also a number of members that have shared no official affiliations, as we aim to foster a really inclusive environment to discuss Massasauga recovery without representing any one organization or government, but we're rather a group of experts and concerned individuals that may choose to represent their organization or government. And so we have 5 main objectives. We provide a mechanism for networking and collaboration among diverse interests. We provide a forum to discuss active projects, the latest research, and coordinated approaches to threat mitigation. We provide expert advice, education, and outreach to organizations and individuals. We encourage ecosystem-based approaches and the mixing of in situ and ex situ efforts in what's called a one plan approach. And we encourage two-eyed seeing approaches that harmonize with many knowledge systems to all actions. And our membership is free if you'd like to join. We'd love to welcome you in. There's an email I had on the first slide, and you'll see it again at the end, or you find me, I'm in red today. We also have just an email distribution list if you'd like updates rarely throughout the year about rattlesnake related stories, events, or updates. We ask that members are actively involved or have a strong capacity to contribute to Eastern Massasauga recovery and bring experience or expertise from many knowledge systems about the species, habitat, recovery activities, and threats. And one thing I really want to emphasize is that you don't need to think of yourself as a rattlesnake expert. We really want help from folks that actually may have more time to put towards some recovery work that some of us that call ourselves experts are low on. And if you set up a meeting and invite us, we will come, but we would like the help with the logistical setting up of meetings. And so we'd like you to be part of a diverse team and collaborate in a respectful manner. We have one membership meeting coming up. I sent the save the date email a couple of days ago for November 2nd this year. It's going to be virtual. And that you participate anywhere in any working groups that are relevant to your jurisdictions or areas of interest. And so we have a few existing working groups that have co-chairs. There's ex situ, community science and outreach, and two-eyed seeing is in the process of maybe being created. There's a couple of affiliated working groups. You heard a lot from Kat earlier today, who works in Wainfleet, and Jonathan Choquette's also at the conference that runs our OPREC affiliate. Like they work really closely with us because they work with the rarest populations that are the most at risk in Southern Ontario. And then we have a couple of recommended working groups that have really important actions, but we need people to step up as chairs or co-chairs to help coordinate getting us together virtually or whatever. We can definitely help with that. And thank you.
Hey, hi everyone. My name is Albana. I'm a PhD candidate at Carleton University, and today we're going to explore the interactions between inland water-based recreation or freshwater recreation and freshwater turtles. So I'm sure many of you have participated in water recreation, whether it's kayaking or swimming or boating or fishing. And with water recreation, I'm sure you've enjoyed the many benefits that come with it, such as enhancing your physical health or your mental well-being, or providing us with a sense of community. It's because of all these benefits in water recreation that we see water recreation growing and increasing globally, and it's predicted to continue to increase in the future. Freshwater recreation involves many interactions between water users and their freshwater environments. Freshwater turtles call these freshwater environments their home and carry out many important behaviors for reproduction and survival. We also know that globally, freshwater biodiversity is in a steep decline, and unfortunately, freshwater turtles are no stranger to this trend. So at a time where water-based recreation is increasing in popularity, but freshwater biodiversity is decreasing, we ask the following question. What are the human-turtle interactions during water-based recreation? To address this question, we set out to conduct a scoping review where we used an a priori methods based on standardized review methods, and we found 25 articles talked about water recreation and freshwater turtles. Specifically, all 25 articles looked at humans impacting freshwater turtles during water recreation. We categorize these interactions as either having a negative effect or a positive effect on turtles, and then later on if they had direct or indirect impacts. We found that 24 of the 25 articles had a negative interaction between freshwater turtles and water recreation. This could be because water recreation has an overall negative impact on freshwater turtles, but it could also be because of a publication bias in the literature, or because certain types of water recreation that were studied, such as fishing and boating mainly, have a negative impact, but other types of water recreation might not. So when we look at the 24 out of the 25 articles that report a negative effect, we see that boating collisions and accidental hooking have a direct impact on turtles, where boating collisions, especially from propeller strikes, can cause mild to severe injuries or in some cases be fatal. Accidental hooking occurs when anglers bycatch turtles, and the fish hooks can lead to internal or external injuries in turtles. When we look at the indirect impacts, human presence near turtles can affect their basking and their nesting behaviors, and in some cases displace them from their critical habitats. And then another indirect impact is wake action from boats, where again, they can disturb nesting and basking behaviors. And in some cases, over time, wakes can erode shorelines, which is the area where freshwater turtles nest. That one article that was missing from those 24 to 25 articles reported a positive interaction between freshwater turtles and water recreation. In this article, a local community made this observatory deck on a lake where passerbyers and water users can take a break and observe turtles basking from a distance, enjoying watching them bask and not disturbing turtles in the process. Many of the articles discussed but didn't study conservation measures to mitigate the risks during water recreation on freshwater turtles. And some of these conservation measures include things like regulating boat speeds and boat sizes and access points, to creating no wake zones, to restricting fishing permits and installing basking perches for more opportunities for turtles to bask, and then spreading awareness via community outreach and also having participatory signs for knowledge transfer. Lastly, some future research in this field can look at other types of water recreation as well as study the efficacy of the conservation measures that some of these articles discussed. And lastly, looking at the human dimension side of these human-turtle interactions. So are water users aware of freshwater turtles in their environment? And if so, are they likely to enact pro-environmental behaviors while they're out there? Thank you.